The western front of France was already devastated and torn apart by many years of war. The Second Battle of the Marne added to the chaos, as Allied soldiers fighting to stay alive and women struggling to support their families had to resist one last major German offense lasting from July 15th to August 6, 1918. The victorious Allies, led by Ferdinand Foch, successfully defended against the last major German offense led by Heinrich Ludendorff. Thus, the hard-fought battle was a colossal turning point and helped bring World War I to its end, becoming one of the most important World War I battles of all time. In the year 1918, during World War I, life was really hard for Allied civilians and soldiers on the western front of France. Many soldiers and civilians were dying, and the Central Powers needed a way to win the war fast before the Americans could deploy more troops to aid the Allies. This led to the last major German offense of World War I, causing the Second Battle of the Marne. There were many important people during the Second Battle of the Marne, such as Ferdinand Foch, the French general who turned the tide of the war for the Allies, and his two commanders, Henry Philippe Pétain and Henry Giraud. Other famous people were Prince William II of Germany, who ordered the last major German offense, led by the famous German general Heinrich Ludendorff. Also, life before the Battle of Marne was extremely difficult because many people on the western front of France lost their homes, personal belongings, husbands, and also their children. Also, they were always under constant threat of being bombed or gassed by the Germans. Many women had to find a way to support their families while their husbands were out fighting the war. Usually, they would work in factories manufacturing goods that supported the Allies. However, they received lower wages than the men would if they had been working in the factories, which made it extremely difficult for the women to support their families. Many women also worked as nurses on the battlefield, treating and taking care of wounded soldiers. The Battle of Marne began on July 15, 1918, when the Germans attacked the Allies in a last effort to win the war by trying to eliminate their armies located on the western front of France near the river Marne. Germany's main plan of attack was to cause a break in a town called Amiens, which was the merge point for the two major Allied armies. The north of Amiens was British and the south of Amiens was French, but the Germans didn't put enough pressure on Amiens for their plan to succeed. After the failed attempt to eliminate the Allied armies, all the Allied commanders and generals on the Western Front came together to have a meeting to discuss who should become Supreme Commander of the Western Front. The Allied commanders and generals came to the conclusion that the Supreme Commander of the Western Front should be a Frenchman, because the majority of the Allied army was mainly French. After a long debate, they made Ferdinand Foch the Supreme Commander of the Western Front, when he said, "Well, Paris is a long way out, and we need to defend here, on the Marne," meaning the Germans aren't going to attack Paris because it's too far away, but they're going to attack the Marne, so we need to defend it here. So Foch started making counterattack plans so they could attack the Germans as soon as possible, because the Germans were killing many Allied soldiers. One of the conflicts that Foch faced was when he found out that the Germans were going to attack the Flanders alongside the Marne, but he needed to convince the other generals and commanders that the Germans would attack there. Once Foch convinced the Allied commanders and generals the Germans would attack on the Flanders alongside the Marne, Foch gave the instruction to his two commanders, Henry Giraud and Henry Philippe Pétain, to attack the Germans on the Flanders. But they deliberately disobeyed Foch's orders, and instead of attacking the Germans, they allowed the Germans to attack them, which was a huge success because they defended so well that only less than 100 Allied men died. The death toll for the Germans would be catastrophic and caused the Germans to retreat, which led to the second counteroffensive of World War I, or the Battle of Amiens, when Foch ordered the Allies to attack the Germans as they were retreating. After the Battle of the Marne, there were many short-term and long-term effects that affect us up to this very day. Some short-term effects are that the German army suffered a loss far greater than the Allied loss of soldiers. And also, a loss of their morale that would never be replenished. Germany was certain that they lost the war after the Battle of the Marne, but still continued to fight on, which led to the Battle of Amiens, which ended World War I. The Battle of the Marne also led to the beginning of the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was one of Germany's allies and one of the Central Powers that suffered greatly because of World War I. The Ottoman Empire's collapse would begin in the year 1918 and would fully collapse in the year 1920. The Battle of Marne also led to the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles was a peace negotiation document that the Germans signed on June 28, 1919, which basically stated that Germany had to give up almost all their land they had during World War I and had to pay a harsh fine equivalent to $442 billion US, but some people believe that the fine's cost was even more than $442 billion US. After the Treaty of Versailles was signed in Paris, France, and after Germany paid the fine and gave up most of the land they had during and before World War I, new countries would have been founded on the land that used to be Germany's. The Battle of Marne also led to World War II because in World War II, Germany's main goal was to restore themselves to their former might, which they had lost in World War I because of the Battle of Marne and the Battle of Amiens. All these short-term and long-term effects would have never been possible if the Allies had not won at the Second Battle of the Marne, and if the French commander Ferdinand Foch was never made Supreme Commander of the Western Front. In conclusion, the Western Front of France was already devastated and torn apart by many years of war. The Second Battle of the Marne added to the devastation. World War I took the lives of millions and would have continued to take the lives of millions if it hadn't been for the Second Battle of the Marne. The Second Battle of the Marne also led to the Battle of Amiens, which ended World War I, which led to the Treaty of Versailles and the foundation of many new countries. The Battle of the Marne also played an important role in the formation of World War II, the most devastating war ever. This is why the Second Battle of the Marne is one of the most important World War I battles of all time, and why it's so important in history.